There's a sticky resin dripping from every pine tree in North America that waterproofs anything it touches. Not for a season, not for years, for decades. Vikings sealed their longships with it and crossed the Atlantic in wooden vessels that never leaked. Native American tribes coated birch bark canoes with it for 8,000 years. In 1776, the Continental Navy used it to waterproof every rope, sail, and seam on ships that defeated the British Empire. It cost $0. You scrape it off a tree trunk with your bare hands. Then the coating industry was born and this ancient knowledge vanished. They did not stop using it because it failed. They stopped because it worked too well. A waterproofing method that comes free from any forest cannot be patented, and what cannot be patented cannot generate quarterly revenue. This is the story of pine resin, the most durable natural sealant ever discovered, and the billion-dollar industry that made you forget it exists. Welcome to Forbidden Camping. If you're not subscribed yet, hit subscribe and the bell. This is where we dig up what the industry buried. The year is 1893. A Norwegian shipbuilder named Anders Larsen is restoring a Viking longship excavated near Oslo. The ship is over 100 years old. When Larsen scrapes the hull, he finds something that shocks every naval architect in Europe. The seams are still sealed. Completely sealed. The material is hard, black and brittle, but it is not cracked after more than a millennium buried in moisture. Chemical analysis reveals it is pure pine resin mixed with animal fat. The Vikings called it chera, a tar extracted by heating pine wood in covered pits. They brushed it hot onto every joint, rope, and wooden surface that touched salt water. Ships sealed with pine resin crossed the North Atlantic to Iceland, Greenland, and North America without pumps, without modern caulking, without synthetic chemicals. The wood stayed dry. The cargo stayed dry. And the ships returned home after months at sea, still floating high on the waterline. But the Vikings were not the first to discover this. Rewind 8,000 years to the Great Lakes region. Indigenous communities built canoes from birch bark, a material so thin you can see light through it. Birch bark alone leaks at every seam. So the canoe builders harvested pine resin from nearby forests, heated it over fire until it liquefied, and painted it across every seam and stitching hole. The resin cooled into a flexible, waterproof seal that lasted years. Archaeologists have found preserved birch bark canoes in bog sites across Minnesota and Ontario. The resin seals are still intact after thousands of years underwater. The same chemistry that kept Viking longships dry also kept indigenous families dry, navigating freezing lakes and rivers for 8,000 continuous years. Now jump to ancient Greece. Greek sailors coated trireme hulls with pine pitch from Aleppo pine forests. Roman engineers documented the practice in technical manuals preserved at Pompeii. They wrote that naval stores, meaning pine resin and tar, were as critical to shipbuilding as iron and timber. Without resin, no Roman-grained ship would survive a voyage from Egypt. Medieval European shipyards consumed thousands of barrels of pine tar annually. England imported so much from Scandinavian forests that it became a strategic military resource. Control the pine forests and you control the seas. By the 1700s, pine resin was one of the most traded commodities in the Atlantic economy. Colonial America shipped barrels of it to Europe. The Continental Navy, during the American Revolution, depended entirely on pine tar to keep their warships watertight against the British fleet. George Washington's letters reference pine resin procurement as a matter of national survival. This was not folklore. This was the foundation of naval power for 3,000 years. And then it disappeared. This video is just the tip of what they buried. I collected everything the coating and outdoor industry does not want you to know. All inside the complete Forbidden Camping Vault, the step-by-step pine resin harvesting guide that no outdoor retailer will stock. Fire-starting methods using resin that military units tested and classified. Emergency shelter waterproofing that costs $0 and outlasts $200 synthetic coatings. Natural wood preservation techniques from shipbuilders the chemical industry erased. DIY rope and fabric treatments that sailors used for centuries. The lost naval stores manual from 1776 that modern yacht clubs pray you never find. Over 10 guides in one vault. No fluff. Straight to the point. The link is in the description. But stay right here because the science behind this resin gets even more disturbing. In 2004, researchers at the Swedish University of Agricultural Sciences published a study on pine resin coating durability. They applied raw Scots pine resin to wood samples and exposed them to accelerated weathering equivalent to 20 years of outdoor UV, moisture cycles, and temperature extremes. After 2 decades of equivalent exposure, the resin showed less than 15% degradation. The wood beneath remained completely protected from water penetration. The researchers concluded that unprocessed pine resin outperforms most petroleum-based wood sealants in long-term moisture resistance. A study from the University of Maine tested traditional birch bark canoe construction using pine pitch. They submerged sealed bark, samples in fresh water for 90 days. Zero leakage. The pine resin seal remained intact. Researchers then froze the samples, thawed them, and submerged them again. Still zero leakage. The resin's flexibility allowed it to expand and contract with temperature changes without cracking. In 2017, a team at Norway's Sintef Research Institute analyzed resin samples from Viking ship burial sites. Chemical testing confirmed the resin retained waterproofing properties. After 1,200 years of burial, the polymer structure had not broken down. A study in the Journal of Archaeological Science examined pine tar production sites across Iron Age Europe. Chemical residue analysis found that ancient tar makers heated pine wood in oxygen-limited conditions to concentrate the resin. The process required no advanced technology, no chemical additives, no industrial equipment. Just pine wood, fire, and a covered pit. Modern recreations produce resin chemically identical to Viking Age samples. Here is the number that should make you stop and think. The average homeowner in the United States spends between $200 and $800 on deck staining and waterproofing every 2 to 3 years. Those products contain petroleum distillates, synthetic polymers, and chemical UV blockers that degrade within 24 to 36 months. Pine resin lasts 20 years. 20 years. And the raw material is free if you know which trees to tap and how to process it safely. If you have made it this far, you already know more about natural waterproofing than 99% of homeowners who buy expensive deck sealers every spring. Are you still paying for petroleum-based coatings when every pine forest produces the most durable sealant in human history? Subscribe and share this with someone who deserves to stop wasting money on products that wear out in 2 years. Everything the industry buried is inside the complete Forbidden Camping Vault. The link is in the description. Now, stay with me, because what the coating corporations did next is the part they pray you never discover. The global wood coatings market generates over $18 billion in annual revenue. $18 billion. That number depends on one assumption, that you believe wood protection requires factory-made chemical products. Companies like Behr, Olympic, and Thompson's Water Seal dominate the consumer market. Their flagship products are petroleum sealants designed to break down within 2 to 4 years. Degradation is not a flaw. It is the entire business model. You apply their coating in year 1. By year 3, the finish is peeling and the wood is absorbing moisture. So you buy another gallon and reapply. Every homeowner with a deck, fence, or outdoor structure is a recurring customer. That cycle generates billions every year. Pine resin breaks that cycle completely. You apply it once and the wood stays sealed for decades. You cannot patent pine resin. It is a naturally occurring substance that humanity has used for 8,000 years. You cannot create a subscription model around something that drips free from trees. You cannot charge $40 per gallon for a material that costs $0 to harvest. And you absolutely cannot build an $18 billion industry around a product that only needs applying once every 20 years. So the coating industry did what industries always do when a free solution threatens expensive revenue. They made you forget it existed. In the 1950s, the chemical coating industry began a massive advertising push promoting synthetic petroleum sealants as modern and superior to natural products. Magazines and home improvement shows featured commercials showing families applying easy modern deck stains from convenient plastic containers. The message was clear. Natural methods were primitive. Modern homeowners deserved modern chemistry. By the 1970s, hardware stores stopped stocking raw pine tar and natural resin products. The few suppliers that remained were small specialty shops serving historical restoration. Mainstream consumers never saw them. University forestry programs that once taught traditional resin extraction removed those courses from the curriculum. Students graduated with wood science degrees without ever learning that their ancestors waterproofed ships with tree sap. Building codes and product certification standards were updated to favor synthetic coatings that met specific lab-tested metrics. Natural resins were never submitted for certification because small producers could not afford the testing fees that chemical companies paid routinely. Contractors and builders defaulted to approved products on official lists. Pine resin was not banned. It was excluded from the system. The industry published consumer guides warning that natural tar products were messy, difficult to apply, and unreliable compared to modern alternatives. They confused the public by conflating coal tar, which is toxic, with pine tar, which humans have used safely for millennia. The entire information ecosystem around wood protection was rewritten to erase natural methods from public memory. And it worked. For 50 years, it worked. Until now. Here is what you do instead. Walk into any forest with pine trees. Look for trees with visible wounds where branches broke off or bark was damaged. You will see hardened yellowish resin seeping from those wounds. That is your raw material. Use a flat tool like a putty knife or sturdy stick to scrape the resin into a metal container. Collect only from actively dripping or easily accessible resin. Never cut into healthy bark. That damages the tree. A single afternoon of harvesting can yield several cups of raw resin. That is enough to waterproof dozens of square feet of wood, fabric, or rope. Bring the container home and heat the resin gently in a double boiler setup. Place the container inside a larger pot of simmering water. Never heat resin over direct flame because it is flammable. As the resin warms, it will soften and become liquid. You can add a small amount of beeswax or animal fat to increase flexibility. Traditional ratios are 3 parts resin to 1 part fat or wax. Stir until combined. The mixture should be smooth and pourable. Apply the hot resin to wood using an old paintbrush or rag. Work it into joints, seams, and end grain where water penetrates. The resin will soak into the wood fibers and harden as it cools. For fabric waterproofing, like canvas tarps or tent seams, brush a thin layer of warm resin across the surface. Let it cool and cure for 24 hours. The fabric will stiffen slightly but remain flexible and waterproof. For rope preservation, dip the entire length of natural fiber rope into warm resin and pull it through your gloved hand to remove excess. Hang the rope to dry. The resin coating protects the fibers from rot and moisture for years. Sailors did this for centuries before synthetic rope existed, for decks and outdoor. Furniture, apply resin in thin coats and allow each coat to cure before adding more. 2 to 3 coats create a durable, water-resistant finish that lasts decades. The surface will darken to a rich amber or black, depending on the resin concentration. Some people love the appearance. Others mix resin with linseed oil to lighten the finish. Both work. I need to be honest with you about limitations. Pine resin is sticky and messy to work with. You will get it on your hands and tools. Mineral spirits or rubbing alcohol removes it from skin and equipment. The finished surface is harder and less glossy than polyurethane. If you want a shiny, modern deck finish, this is not for you. But if you want waterproofing that actually lasts and costs nothing, pine resin is unmatched. For camping and outdoor gear, this is pure gold. Waterproof your tent seams, tarp edges, pack straps, boots. A small tin of processed resin in your gear bag solves 100 problems. A woodworker in Vermont posted that he sealed his deck with pine resin in 2008. 16 years later, the wood is still protected. No reapplication, no peeling, no water damage. Compare that to his neighbor who reseals with commercial deck stain every 3 years and has spent over $200 in product costs. Think about what you just learned. For 8,000 years, humans waterproofed boats, buildings, and clothing with resin from pine trees. Vikings crossed oceans. Native tribes navigated rivers. Navies won wars, all using material that drips free from trees. Then, in the 1950s, the chemical industry convinced you that waterproofing requires a $40 can of petroleum that breaks down in 3 years. This knowledge did not die. It was buried under $18 billion of marketing. But pine trees do not forget. The resin still drips, the chemistry still works. And the shipbuilders who trusted it for 3,000 years were not wrong. If this vault opened something for you, subscribe and share it. Every share preserves what the coating industry tried to erase from your memory. The next vault opens soon, and what the industry buried this time is even heavier.